Good day, one and all. Welcome to the Belonging Advantage, where leadership, culture, and belonging meet. I'm Dr. Patricia Robinson, and I teach and work at the intersection of leadership and culture, with a focus on belonging, psychological safety, and values-based influence. Today, we're going to talk about belonging. This whole podcast, in some way, shape, or form, is about belonging. Whether you lead a team, serve in ministry, teach students, run a household, or simply want to become a stronger version of yourself, this conversation is for you. Belonging is one of the most powerful forces in human behavior, but it's often misunderstood. People think belonging is soft or optional or emotional, but belonging is actually a leadership issue, a culture issue, and a performance issue. Every one of us has influence, and wherever influence exists, culture forms. Belonging is what determines whether people feel safe enough to contribute, grow, and stay connected. That's true in organizations, families, classrooms, teams, communities. In this episode, I'm going to share what belonging is, why it matters, and talk about some research that tells us about the psychological safety. I'm also going to introduce to you the 4 pillars of the belonging leadership. So stay tuned. We're in for a good time today. So let's start by setting the record straight that belonging is not soft. You're not going to be weak because you embrace belonging in your leadership, in your family, in your relationships. Belonging is not a sign of being soft or being weak. It's not a nice to have. Belonging is powerful. When belonging is present, you have people who tend to be more engaged. They want to contribute. They want to speak up. They want to collaborate, and they feel more motivated. However, when belonging is missing, you have those individuals who are now in protection mode. They want to protect and guard themselves. They begin to withdraw or hold back ideas. They stop asking questions and stop taking healthy risks. And in most cases, they eventually leave, physically or emotionally. But the scary part is, many times, and I'm sure we can all attest to this, many times people leave emotionally long before they actually leave. It happens in relationships. It happens in the office. They stay, but they stop contributing. They stop caring. They stop offering their best. They're busy planning their exit, their physical exit. So belonging isn't just a warm concept. It's a culture issue. It's a leadership issue. And today is the beginning of a foundational series where I'm going to give you a framework for how to build belonging intentionally. I've been studying belonging, doing some research on belonging, and I've come up with this framework that speaks to it well, and I want to share it with you guys. So this is episode 1 of a 5-part foundational series where I'm introducing what I call the belonging leadership model. Character, courage, conviction, culture. Think of this as your foundation. If you build on the 4 pillars, and toward the end of the show, I'll give you a bit more about the upcoming episodes. But if you build on these 4 pillars, your influence becomes safer and more effective anywhere you lead. At work, at home, in the community, or in ministry. You want to be a safe place and an effective leader, an effective influencer. So if you've ever asked yourself any of these questions, and I know I have asked myself every single one of these, how do I create belonging without lowering standards? How do I speak up without becoming confrontational? How do I stay consistent even when pressure rises? How do I build a healthy culture even if I'm not the boss? And each of these questions resonates in any environment. Work environment, home environment, church environment, because it speaks about belonging. And what every human being wants and needs is that need to belong. So if you ask any of those questions, if you can relate to any of those questions, and I'm sure there are many other questions that can be asked, and you can stay tuned because this podcast, this show will touch on different aspects of belonging, aspects you may not even have thought relate to belonging, but it does. So if that's you, this series, this podcast, this show is for you. Let's start off by defining belonging. And belonging there are many different thought leaders on belonging, and they all have different definitions. I tend to go with this one. Belonging is the experience of being seen, valued, and safe enough to contribute without having to shrink who you are. Without having to shrink who you are. You see, when you're being seen, valued, and you're in a safe environment where you can speak up, ask questions, contribute, without having to put on a facade of who you are or to shrink who you are, it begins to empower you. It builds your confidence. And so that's where we're taking belonging. Belonging is not about everyone agreeing. It's not about being comfortable all the time even. And it's not about being liked all the time. However, it is about dignity, having a voice, that safety issue, and the contribution factor. So when you think about that, think about it like this. Belonging is the feeling that you can show up as yourself, and your presence is wanted, not merely tolerated. And you can very much tell the difference of when your presence is being tolerated. And it's not a nice feeling. I can say that because I've been there. Belonging allows you to show up as yourself in an environment, in a place where your presence is wanted because you have something of value to add to that environment. You don't have to shrink or to hold back. And so when you're thinking about shrinking or holding back, that looks like you staying quiet. It looks like you overthinking, you're people pleasing, or you're avoiding being visible. And sometimes you don't even realize you're shrinking until you feel a relief when you leave the room. That elephant in the room, that pressure, let's use pressure instead, that pressure in the atmosphere in that room is so tense and so heavy that you naturally just begin to shrink back. And when you leave that space and go into a space that you consider safe, your shoulders begin to relax, your breathing normalizes, and you realize you were just in an environment where you were not being your true, genuine, authentic self. Let me give you two contexts. One of a workplace. And I just mentioned about being in a meeting and that pressure is there, and you have an idea, you want to share it, but because you've been in this room multiple times, you've been in these meetings multiple times, and you've watched what happens to people who disagree. You've seen people get shut down. They're talked over, or in some way they're punished. So you stay quiet. So that person stays quiet, not because they don't have value, but because it doesn't feel safe. Oftentimes, people stop offering very good ideas in that situation, in situations like that. The team may look calm on the outside, but underneath, people are planning their withdrawal. They're planning their exit, emotionally or physically. And when that happens, organizations lose the very insight, the very contributions it needs to improve. And we're going to touch on that a bit later as we continue with this series. Now, let's talk about it in a personal space. You've been around when someone feels like an outsider. Even if no one says it directly, the way they talk around a person, the way a person is not included in certain parts of the conversation, they feel like an outsider. You may feel like an outsider. I've felt like an outsider. And no one has directly said, oh, you're an outsider. You're an outsider. The culture that is formed determines how people feel that they belong or not. So belonging is not just a workplace issue, it's a human issue. So I want to go back just a little bit and anchor this entire podcast, this entire series, this entire show to something I wrote in my dissertation at the University of South Florida, and it continues to guide my work. I mentioned earlier that I've done some research in belonging, so it's very dear and near to my heart. And I wrote that sense of belonging is crucial and powerful. It is at the center of living a meaningful and engaging life. Now, I didn't write that line to be poetic or to fill the word capacity needed for my dissertation. But seriously, I wrote it because I saw how deeply belonging impacts engagement, confidence, and meaning, especially in environments where people want to contribute but don't feel safe to do so. And so if belonging is that central, then leadership in any capacity has to take it seriously. It has to be something that leaders and influencers take seriously and make intentional strides to make sure that belonging is present in every environment they're a part of. Now, belonging matters because people don't only bring their skills to these environments, they bring their identity, their history, their hopes, their fears, their sense of self. So when it's strong, when that belonging is strong, you have people who want to take ownership. They're willing to invest emotionally. They're willing to learn from their mistakes, and they're more resilient under stress. But when you have an environment that belonging is weak, people are not thriving. They're in survival mode. And again, they're in that protective mode of protecting themselves. They're not going to offer their best. They're going to be disengaging emotionally and eventually physically from whatever environment that they believe or feel that they no longer belong to. And when you see that that disengagement happening, that silence, that tension, don't only ask, well, what's wrong with them? What's wrong with him? What's wrong with her? The question you ought to be asking, what's happening in the environment? Because people respond to what they experience. And if they don't feel safe, they're going to slowly but surely remove themselves from that environment. You can think about a family or friendship environment even, where one person always gets talked over or their feelings get dismissed. Over time, that person stops sharing, stop wanting to be around the other people. They may even still show up from time to time, but they won't open up. So that's what low belonging looks like. Presence without participation. And it happens everywhere, in the homes, in churches, on teams. Anywhere where a group of people are together, presence without participation more than likely is happening. Let me add a distinction here, because I don't want you to confuse belonging with approval. They're not the same thing. A person who's desiring to belong is not necessarily seeking approval. It's different. Belonging means you can be respected and valued even when there are differences, when there's feedback, where there's constructive criticism, where there's correction. Approval says, I only accept you when you perform. Belonging says, you matter here and you can grow here. So it's not dependent on what you do. It's not dependent on being approved but it's about belonging and mattering and having value where you are to be able to contribute. In strong cultures, people don't have to earn dignity. They're given dignity, and they're also challenged to grow. So in belonging, because you value what a person is able to contribute, they have this dignity about themselves because the group, the environment, is challenging them to become even better than who and what they are at that level where they are. So belonging isn't about lowering standards. It's about allowing growth and making growth possible for individuals. Returning back to research, I mentioned that I've done some research, but there are many different researchers that have tackled this topic of belonging and the different aspects of it and how it fits into other areas of our lives. And so I want to ground this in some of that credible research. And I want to connect it so that you know what I'm talking about and experience it in real life. So belonging is often being treated like a soft topic, but research shows it's more of a strategic one. We have psychologist Abraham Maslow. You've all heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where he proposes that humans have levels of needs. After our basic physiological needs and safety needs are met, we have belongingness and love needs. The need for connection, relationship, and acceptance. Where belonging isn't optional. It's part of what humans require to function well. And when belonging needs are unmet, people don't flourish. Then they're not flourishing. They're not thriving. They're just merely coping. There's another project by Google. They did a multi-year study that started in 2012, a well-known research initiative they did on team effectiveness. And they identified that psychological safety was the most important dynamic in high-performing teams. Psychological safety. That connects directly to belonging, because when people don't feel safe, as I've mentioned before, they don't fully participate. You cannot have a high-performing, high-functioning team if the individuals don't feel safe to participate, to contribute, to speak up, to ask questions. Brené Brown, another researcher and thought leader, offers a very useful distinction in describing the difference between fitting in and belonging. Fitting in is when we change who we are to be accepted, while belonging is rooted in authenticity, that you being able to be real, even when it's uncomfortable. That distinction matters because cultures that reward fitting in often silences people, while cultures that support belonging, they invite that contribution. So you can see that a lot of adults who are successful, but they're still stuck in fitting in. They're still stuck in becoming what somebody else wants from them, changing who they are to fit in. But that belonging is what frees people to contribute as themselves. And that's what we want. We want to free people to be able to contribute as themselves. And there's also another researcher that belongs to the psychology, in the psychology field, where one of the most cited pieces of research on the topic, Baumeister and Leary, they proposed that the need to belong is a fundamental human motivation. The drive to form and maintain strong, stable interpersonal relationships. In other words, belonging isn't a bonus. It's part of how humans are wired. And that ties in beautifully with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We are wired for meaningful connection, not just in childhood, but across our entire lifespan. We need that belonging. We need that connection. So as you can see, research points to the practicalness of things. Belonging is a human need, and psychological safety is part of the environment that protects it. When leadership creates conditions where people can't be honest, ask questions, or show up fully, belonging declines. And when belonging declines, engagement declines. So we now need to focus on something very important, and that's some of the things that destroys belonging, those invisible belonging killers that we all experience in our places of employment, our homes, whatever environments we may be in. And those things may be happening perhaps unintentionally, but they're happening. Those things such as dismissiveness, sarcasm, unpredictability, favoritism, silence when harm happens, gossip as the main communication system, public correction or humiliation. These are all things that are those silent killers of belonging. And we have got to find a way to shift that, to turn it around. So listen to this statement carefully. Culture is not what you say. It's what you tolerate. So if you're tolerating sarcasm, if you're tolerating bullying, if you're tolerating inconsistency, that's what you're tolerating. That's the culture that you're building, creating in the environment that you're a part of. Remember, belonging is shaped by what people experience consistently. So you're thinking, you're listening to this podcast, and you're like, okay, so what does that really look like? What does belonging actually look like? So here's a quick picture. Belonging looks like people being able to ask questions without feeling stupid. No question is a dumb question, because it could be a question somebody else wanted to ask but was too afraid to ask the question. Belonging looks like people being able to disagree respectfully without fear. People being corrected with dignity, not shaming, not humiliating. People being acknowledged for their contributions. And people being able to make mistakes and learn from them instead of trying to hide from those things. One of the best questions you can ask about belonging and the culture is this: is it safe to be honest here? Is it safe for you, your employees, your family, your church members to be honest in any of those particular environments? Because if it's not safe to be honest, it's not safe to belong. And that's where the belonging leadership model becomes so practical. It has 4 pillars, as I mentioned before. The first one is character. Character creates trust. Trust is the foundation of safety. Pillar 2 is about courage. And courage protects honesty. Courage addresses what matters. The third pillar is conviction. Conviction creates consistency under pressure. And pillar 4 is culture. Culture is shaped by what you reward, what you ignore, and what you repeat. So when you put it all together, character builds trust. Courage builds safety. Conviction builds consistency. And culture becomes the outcome. If you only remember one thing from today, remember this: belonging doesn't happen accidentally. It's built. It's intentional. And that's through trust, honesty, consistency, and the everyday culture people experience. Before we go, let's do a quick reflection exercise. Now, if you're driving, listening to this, please don't write. Just think about it, and you can go back and listen when you have time at home or in your private space. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to reflect, and I'm going to ask you a series of 3 questions. Where do you feel the strongest sense of belonging in your life right now? What makes it feel that way? Where do you feel you have to shrink or perform to be accepted? What's happening in that environment? What does it look like? What do you want to be known for as a leader and influencer? So choose one word: character, courage, conviction, or culture. Now ask yourself, what is one small action I can take this week to build belonging in one environment? If you got an answer, if you knew exactly what you could do, then that's worth paying attention to. That means you've been experiencing this for a while, and it's time to put action to it. So 3 practical questions as we close that you can take this week with you as well. Ask someone, what helps you feel supported here? What makes it hard to speak up? When do you feel most valued? That's the first action, to ask someone any of those 3 questions. Action 2, name the standard. Say what you value. We speak with respect. We handle issues directly. We protect dignity. And the third action, create a micro moment of safety. Remember, it's about being intentional, right? So acknowledge someone. Invite someone to speak who's normally quiet. repair quickly, correct dismissiveness. See, it's these small moments that shape culture. So those are just 3 actions that you can put into place this week as well. So over the next few episodes, I'm going to help you lead in a way that creates safety without sacrificing standards. You'll get tools you can apply immediately, whether you're leading a team, leading peers, leading at home, or leading yourself. And we've got to learn to lead ourselves first and foremost. That's important. So where we're going to be heading next. Episode 2 will deal with character. Why trust is the first leadership currency. Episode 3, we're going to dive into courage. How to speak up without burning bridges. Without burning bridges. Episode 4 is about conviction. Staying aligned under pressure. And episode 5 in this series will be on culture. How belonging is created in those small moments. And if you want a tool to walk with you through this entire series, these first 5 episodes, I created a free resource. It's called Belonging Check-In Questions. It includes 10 practical questions you can use to build trust, psychological safety, and belonging anywhere, in any environment. The link is in the show notes. Listen, I want to thank you for listening to The Belonging Advantage, where leadership, culture, and belonging meet. Remember, sense of belonging is crucial and powerful. It is at the center of living a meaningful and engaging life. Until next time, take care.